All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a game that's got everyone talking, but not always for the right reasons. We're talking about Stalker 2. Heart of Core No Bullets, finally here. But the launch has been, well, let's just say a bit rough around the edges. You've sent us two really in-depth reviews from Czech gaming sites, Vortex and Sector.sk. So are we looking at a Chernobyl-level meltdown? Or is there something worth salvaging in this radioactive wasteland?
That's the million-ruble question, isn't it? The buzz around this game has been massive, especially for fans of the original Stalker games. But going through these reviews, one thing jumped out at me, the clash between ambition and execution. Okay,
So let's break that down. What exactly is making this game such a divisive experience?
well, both reviewers agree on one thing. The zone itself is visually stunning. They talk about the incredible detail, the way nature is taken over, and the atmosphere of unease that just permeates everything. It's like stepping into a Tarkovsky film.
Okay, so imagine Fallout, right? But instead of this over-the-top, almost fun apocalypse, Stalker goes for something more haunting. The zone itself feels like a character, right?
Yeah, but here's where things get tricky. That beauty comes at a cost. Reviewers are warning about performance issues. That might actually pull you out of the experience.
So we're talking frame rate drops, stuttering, that kind of thing. But how much does that actually impact the gameplay?
Well, imagine you're sneaking through this abandoned building. Every sound making you jump. Subtly, the game freezes for a second. That tension, that immersion, it's gone. And for a game like Stalker, that relies on atmosphere and that sense of dread. That's a major problem.
Ouch. Yeah, that's definitely a mood killer. So, stunning world. Potentially janky performance. What about the actual gameplay loop? What are we doing in this irradiated wonderland?
You're thrown into the zone as Skiff, this everyday guy whose life gets turned upside down by a mysterious anomaly. Think flickering lights, strange noises. And then boom, you're on a quest for answers. The core gameplay, as both reviewers describe it, is this constant struggle for survival. You're exploring, fighting off mutated creatures and rival stalkers, scavenging for supplies, and trying to piece together the mystery behind it all.
And you mentioned a struggle for survival. So, are we talking hardcore, unforgiving gameplay here? Like, if I don't manage my resources carefully, I'm toast.
That's the impression I get from the reviews. Vortex actually uses the phrase hardcore survival and emphasizes the need for careful planning and resource management. They even criticize the in-game economy, saying it's basically broken. Because mission rewards are so meager compared to the cost of essential supplies, you really have to scavenge, make difficult choices, and adapt to the zone's harsh conditions.
That's interesting. So, one reviewer is criticizing the economy, but doesn't that tie into the whole survival aspect? Isn't that kind of the point?
That's where Sector.sk comes in with a different perspective. They actually praise that aspect of the game, arguing that it forces you to think strategically and engage with the world on its terms. It's not about running and gunning. It's about making every bullet count, every bandage matter.
Oh. Are we saying that it depends on your playstyle? Like, if you're someone who enjoys that meticulous resource management and the challenge of scraping by, you might actually appreciate the unforgiving nature of the economy.
Precisely. And it brings up the question of difficulty settings. Maybe there's a way to tailor the experience so it's less punishing for those who prefer a more relaxed playthrough.
Okay. So we've got this stunning but potentially glitchy world, hardcore survival mechanics, and a mysterious story that throws you into the zone. What about the story itself? Is it all doom and gloom, or are there some bright spots in the narrative?
Actually, both reviewers seem surprisingly positive about the story and character interactions. Vortex even draws comparisons to Cyberpunk 2077 in terms of the narrative structure,
Huh.
highlighting this quest for answers, shifting alliances, and the feeling that your choices have real consequences.
So we're not just wandering around shooting mutants. There's actually a compelling story to pull us through.
That seems to be the consensus. You're uncovering the mystery of the artifact, navigating the complex motivations of different factions, and trying to figure out who to trust. And for the fans of the series, there are even glimpses of familiar faces from previous Stalker games.
Oh, so they're throwing in some fan service too. I bet that's going over well with the hardcore fans.
Definitely. It's like a nod to the community, acknowledging the rich history of the series. But speaking of things that might not be going over so well, we need to address the elephant in the room, the A-Life system.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. I've seen a lot of chatter about it in the comments section. What's the deal with this A-Life system, and why is everyone making such a big fuss about it?
Well, it's one of the signature features of the Stalker series. It's this complex AI system that simulates a living, breathing world Think NPCs with their own routines, dynamic factions vying for control, and events unfolding organically, even without the player's direct involvement. It's supposed to make the zone feel truly unpredictable and immersive.
So it's like the world is reacting to you,
Right.
but also living its own life, even when you're not looking. That sounds pretty ambitious.
Exactly. It's a huge part of what makes STLKER so unique.
Hmm.
But the problem is, according to both reviews and the player feedback we're seeing, it's not quite working as intended in STLKER2, at least not yet.
So what are people experiencing? Is it completely broken? Or just not living up to expectations?
It seems to be a bit of both. Some players are reporting weird enemy spawns, like mutants appearing out of thin air or behaving erratically. Others are saying that the factions aren't interacting in a believable way, and the world feels static and lifeless. It's like that dynamic, unpredictable element that the A-Life system is known for is just missing.
That's a shame. It sounds like a really cool feature. But it's frustrating when something that's supposed to be a core part of the experience just isn't working properly.
It is, and it highlights a bigger issue that's come up a lot in the discussion around STLKER2. The feeling that it was rushed out the door.
Yeah.
It's like they had this incredible vision, but maybe they needed more time to polish everything
Yeah.
and make sure it all worked together seamlessly.
Yeah. It's frustrating, right? You wait for this game, and it's not quite there yet, but honestly, that's kind of how big games work these days. It's almost like they're still being built even after we can play them.
It's true. And to be fair, the developers are acknowledging the issues and promising updates and patches. But for some players, that's not enough. They feel like they've been burned before, paying full price for a game that's still a work in progress.
So we've got this incredible world, a compelling story, and some really innovative features. But it's all held back by technical issues and the feeling that it's just not quite finished. What does that mean for someone who's on the fence about buying it?
That's the tough question, isn't it? If you're a diehard STALKER fan, you're probably going to play it regardless, even with the flaws. But for everyone else, I think it comes down to your tolerance for those issues.
And your budget, right? Because this is not a cheap game.
Right. But here's a potentially game-changing factor. It's available on Game Pass.
Oh, yeah. That's a big deal. So for those who aren't familiar, Game Pass is like Netflix for video games. You pay a monthly subscription, and you get access to a huge library of games, including new releases.
Exactly. So for someone who's curious about STALKER2, but hesitant to drop a large sum of money on it, Game Pass offers a low-risk way to try it out.
That's a great point. It takes the pressure off, right? You can dive in, see for yourself if the atmosphere and the gameplay grab you, and if the bugs and performance issues are a deal breaker.
Exactly. And if you do decide to wait for patches and updates, you're not out the full price of the game.
Okay, so maybe it's not a complete disaster. It sounds like there's a lot to love here, but it's important to be aware of the caveats. What about the overall player reaction? We talked about some of the negative feedback, but are there people who are genuinely enjoying the game?
Absolutely. In fact, Vortex included some player comments in their review. And it's fascinating to see the different perspectives. You have people who are praising the atmosphere, the story, the feeling of being truly immersed in the zone. They're willing to overlook the technical issues because they're so captivated by the world and the gameplay.
So for some players, the pros outweigh the cons. They're getting that unique STALKR experience, and that's what matters to them.
Exactly. But then you have other players who are understandably frustrated. They waited years for this game, and it feels like a letdown. They're encountering bugs, performance issues, and design choices that they disagree with. And for them, that sours the entire experience.
It really highlights the subjective nature of gaming, doesn't it? What might be a deal breaker for one person could be a minor annoyance for another.
Absolutely. And it's why it's so important to look at a range of opinions and consider what aspects of a game are most important to you personally.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Stunning world, but with performance hiccups. Hardcore survival gameplay that some love and others find frustrating. A compelling story, but a feeling that the game needed more time in the oven. And a divided player base, with some singing its praises and others feeling let down.
I think that sums it up quite nicely. It's a complex picture.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer to the question of whether STLKER2 is worth your time and money.
So what's the final verdict? What advice would you give to our listener who's been patiently waiting to hear if they should take the plunge into the direst zone?
It sounds like there are some real trade-offs to consider.
Because it does sound like those were the game's strongest points, based on these reviews.
Absolutely. If you're someone who prioritizes a smooth, polished experience above all else, then maybe waiting for patches and further optimization is the way to go.
Or if you're someone who tends to get really annoyed by glitches and frame rate drops, that might really detract from your enjoyment.
On the other hand, if you're the kind of player who values atmosphere, world building, and a story that pulls you in, then Stalker 2 might still be worth checking out, even in its current state.
Especially if you can do it through Game Pass, like we were talking about. That way you can sort of test the waters without making a huge financial commitment.
That's a really good point. Game Pass offers a great way to mitigate the risk. You can dive in, experience the zone for yourself, and see if those technical issues are a deal breaker or something you can look past.
And honestly, even if you decide to wait, keeping an eye on the community feedback and the developer updates is a good idea. If they can iron out those performance issues and maybe tweak some of the gameplay elements that are causing frustration, then we might be looking at a truly special game down the line.
I agree. There's a lot of potential here,
Yeah.
and it would be a shame to see it squandered. But ultimately, the choice is yours.
Wow. I think we've armed our listener with enough information to make an informed decision. They know what to expect, both the good and the bad.
And hopefully, they can now weigh those factors against their own preferences and make the choice that's right for them.
Huge thanks to Vortex and Sector.sk for their in-depth reviews. They really gave us a lot to chew on.
And to our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the zone. Whether you decide to jump in now or wait for things to settle, we hope you have an incredible experience.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, then maybe keep a gas mask handy just in case